The morning of December 7, 1941, began with a deceptive calm over Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. At 7:55 a.m., the tranquility shattered as Japanese warplanes, their red sun emblems gleaming, roared across the sky. Without warning, they unleashed a storm of bombs and torpedoes on the unsuspecting American fleet. Explosions tore through steel hulls, sending 19 warships to the ocean floor or leaving them crippled. Black smoke choked the air, mingling with the screams of 2,300 American sailors and soldiers who perished in the chaos. Pearl Harbor, the proud heart of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, was reduced to a smoldering ruin. In Washington, D.C., President Franklin Roosevelt received the news with a clenched jaw, his eyes burning with fury. Standing before Congress, his voice trembled with resolve as he declared December 7th, a date which will live in infamy. The attack wasn't just a military strike, it was an assault on America's soul. Across the nation, from bustling cities to quiet farms, citizens gathered around radios, their hearts pounding with shock and rage. In bars, men slammed fists on tables, vowing revenge. In homes, mothers wept for sons already enlisting. Congress, unified in outrage, abandoned its isolationist stance, thrusting America into a global war. In Tokyo, the mood was one of grim triumph. The militarists, drunk on ambition, celebrated their audacious strike. But Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the attack, stood apart, his face shadowed with foreboding. Having studied in America, he knew its industrial might and unyielding spirit. "We have awakened a sleeping giant," he whispered, his words drowned by the cheers of his peers. Branded a traitor by hardline generals, Yamamoto's warning would soon prove prophetic. Japan had ignited a fire it could not extinguish, setting the stage for a cataclysmic struggle that would define the Pacific War. On December 8, 1941, President Roosevelt faced a packed Congress, his voice resolute. America will not falter. The chamber erupted in applause as he declared war on Japan. 3 days later, the U.S. extended its fight to Germany and Italy, committing to a two-front war across continents. The nation transformed overnight, its vast resources mobilized for vengeance. Factories that once built cars now forged tanks. Shipyards hummed with the construction of warships. Military spending surged from $4.5 billion in 1941 to $20 billion in 1942, then $38 billion in 1943, dwarfing Japan's capabilities. In small towns and sprawling cities, the call to arms resonated. Young men flooded recruitment centers, their faces alight with patriotic fervor. Women, determined to contribute, stepped into factories, their hands assembling bombs and bullets with relentless precision. The American spirit, once dormant, now roared like a tidal wave, ready to sweep away its enemies. Japan, meanwhile, reveled in its early dominance. Its Navy-10 aircraft carriers, 10 battleships, 38 cruisers, and 113 destroyers far outmatched America's modest Pacific fleet of 3 carriers, 9 battleships, 22 cruisers, and 54 destroyers. Japanese forces swept through the Pacific, unchallenged, their confidence unshakable. But beneath this facade of invincibility, cracks were forming. Japan's resources were stretched thin, its supply lines vulnerable. America, with its boundless industrial might, was quietly forging the tools of Japan's destruction. With America reeling, Japan pressed its advantage. The Southern Advance strategy saw Japanese forces storm through Southeast Asia, seizing the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. British, French, and Dutch colonies fell like dominoes, their defenses crumbling before Japan's relentless onslaught. The rising sun flag flew over Pacific Islands, inching ever closer to Australia's shores. To the Japanese militarists, this was the dawn of their empire, a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere under Tokyo's iron rule. In Manila, terrified civilians fled as Japanese tanks rolled through the streets. In Singapore, British soldiers surrendered, their heads bowed in defeat. The Japanese war machine seemed unstoppable, fueled by a fanatical belief in its divine destiny. Generals in Tokyo toasted their victories, dreaming of a world bent to their will. But the cost of conquest was mounting. Japan's factories, running at full capacity, struggled to secure oil, steel, and manpower. Every victory stretched their resources thinner, their supply lines more precarious. In contrast, America's industrial heartland pulsed with energy, producing weapons at a staggering pace. The Japanese, blinded by hubris, failed to see the storm gathering on the horizon, a storm that would soon break their empire apart. On April 18, 1942, the skies above Tokyo darkened with an unthinkable threat. A squadron of American B-25 bombers, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, emerged from the horizon, launched from a carrier in a daring gamble. Bombs rained down on the Japanese capital, shattering factories and military depots. The explosions echoed through the streets, sending civilians scrambling for cover. The damage was modest, but the psychological impact was seismic. Japan, which had believed its homeland sacred and untouchable, was shaken to its core. In the imperial palace, Emperor Hirohito sat in stunned silence, his divine aura pierced by the audacity of the American strike. The Japanese people, taught to revere their emperor as a god, whispered in fear. If Tokyo could be bombed, what was safe? In Washington, the raid was a spark of hope. Newspapers trumpeted Doolittle's heroism, and Americans, still stinging from Pearl Harbor, felt a surge of pride. The raid proved that Japan was not invincible and that America could strike back with ruthless precision. For Japan's militarists, the attack was a humiliating wake-up call, fueling their resolve to crush the US once and for all. In early July 1942, the Pacific Ocean became a crucible of fate. Near the tiny atoll of Midway, the Japanese and American navies collided in a battle that would reshape the war. Japan, confident in its superior fleet, aimed to obliterate the US Navy and cement its dominance. But American codebreakers had cracked Japan's plans, giving the US a critical edge. As dawn broke, American dive bombers screamed from the skies, targeting Japan's carriers. Explosions tore through the decks of 4 Japanese carriers, Kagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, sending them to the ocean's depths. Sailors screamed as flames engulfed their ships, their dreams of victory sinking with them. The battle was a slaughter, ending Japan's unbroken string of triumphs. In Tokyo, shock gave way to despair. Admiral Yamamoto, who had foreseen America's strength, could only watch as his worst fears materialized. In America, the victory at Midway ignited celebrations, from New York's Times Square to California's coast. The tide had turned, and Japan's empire was now on borrowed time. After Midway, America unleashed its full might. Factories across the nation worked tirelessly, producing thousands of planes, ships, and tanks. Shipyards launched new carriers at breakneck speed, while training camps churned out soldiers honed for battle. The US military, once outmatched, was now a juggernaut, armed with cutting-edge technology and an unbreakable will. Japan, by contrast, was faltering. American bombers pounded its Pacific bases, reducing factories and supply depots to rubble. The Japanese Navy, once the terror of the seas, was crippled by losses it could not replace. On the home front, civilians endured relentless air raids, their cities burning under the onslaught. The samurai spirit, once a source of strength, began to crumble as soldiers whispered of defeat. By late 1943, America seized control of the Pacific. The fall of the Mariana Islands cut Japan's supply lines, isolating its forces. In Tokyo, the air grew heavy with dread. The empire, built on conquest and pride, was unraveling, and the Japanese people began to sense the end. As defeat loomed, Japan turned to a desperate tactic. Kamikaze, young pilots, barely out of their teens, climbed into planes packed with explosives, their eyes burning with fanatical resolve. They dove into American ships, sacrificing their lives in fiery explosions. Mini-submarines and human-guided torpedoes followed, turning soldiers into living weapons. The kamikaze attacks were devastating, sinking American ships and killing thousands. But the cost to Japan was apocalyptic. Over 2,200 pilots perished, gutting the Air Force. Training new pilots took far longer than building planes, leaving Japan's skies defenseless. American bombers now roamed freely, reducing cities to ashes. In Japanese villages, families mourned sons who would never return. Civilians huddled in shelters, their faith in victory eroded by the constant wail of air raid sirens. The kamikaze strategy, born of desperation, only accelerated Japan's descent into ruin, a tragic sacrifice that could not halt the inevitable. On May 7, 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered unconditionally, silencing Europe's battlefields. The news sent a chill through Tokyo, a grim foreshadowing of Japan's fate. Yet the militarists, blinded by their code of honor, vowed to fight to the last man. In a heated cabinet meeting, they declared Bentul Jiedan, Honshu Kessen, a final stand on Japan's home islands. Emperor Hirohito, revered as a living god, sat silently as his generals made this suicidal choice. While bombs rained on his people, killing thousands daily, he remained detached, his thoughts consumed by the preservation of his throne. His silence was a betrayal, prioritizing imperial legacy over the lives of his subjects. Across the Pacific, the Allies prepared their final move. On July 26, 1945, the Potsdam Declaration was issued, a stark ultimatum: Japan must surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. The fate of a nation hung in the balance, and time was running out. Millions of leaflets fluttered over Japan, each bearing the Potsdam Declaration's chilling words. From rice paddies to urban slums, every citizen read the warning: surrender or be annihilated. The message was clear, yet in Tokyo, the government hesitated. Prime Minister Suzuki Kantaro, caught between the emperor and the militarists, failed to respond. Hirohito's reluctance stemmed from a singular obsession: preserving the imperial system and the three sacred treasures, the Yata mirror, the Kusanagi sword, and the Yasakani jewel. These relics, tied to Japan's mythical origins, were more precious to him than the lives of his people. As American bombs leveled cities, his focus on these artifacts revealed a leader more concerned with legacy than survival. The Japanese people, battered by air raids, grew restless. Whispers of dissent spread, questioning the war's purpose. The Potsdam Declaration was a lifeline, but Hirohito's indecision pushed Japan closer to the abyss. In Washington, President Harry Truman grappled with an agonizing choice. Invading Japan's mainland, as planned in Operation Coronet, could cost 1.2 million American lives. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa had shown the ferocity of Japanese resistance. Soldiers fought to the death. Civilians leaped from cliffs rather than surrender. At Iwo Jima, 21,000 Japanese died, with 31,000 American casualties. Okinawa claimed 49,000 American lives after 2 brutal months. Truman knew the American public would not tolerate such losses. The atomic bomb, a weapon of unimaginable power, offered a way to end the war without an invasion. But its use would unleash a horror never seen before, staining Truman's legacy forever. Torn between duty and morality, he chose the bomb, hoping it would force Japan's surrender and spare millions of lives, American and Japanese alike. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the B-29 Enola Gay soared above Hiroshima. A single uranium-235 bomb, dubbed Little Boy, fell, detonating with a blinding flash. Temperatures soared to 70 degrees Celsius, incinerating everything in its path. Hiroshima, a bustling city with Southern Command headquarters, became a sea of fire. Tens of thousands perished instantly. Their shadows burned into walls. Survivors staggered through the ruins, their bodies scorched, their cries swallowed by the inferno. The world reeled at the bomb's power. In Tokyo, the government was stunned but remained silent, clinging to defiance. The destruction of Hiroshima was a warning, but Japan's leaders, led by Hirohito, refused to heed it, sealing their nation's fate. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, a second atomic bomb, Fat Man, struck Nagasaki. Another 70,000 lives were snuffed out in an instant. That same day, the Soviet Union declared war, launching a devastating assault on Japan's Kwantung Army in Manchuria. Japan was now trapped, crushed between American bombs and Soviet tanks. The 2 atomic bombs claimed over 200,000 lives, a staggering toll born of Japan's delay in accepting the Potsdam Declaration. Fear gripped the nation as civilians braced for a third bomb. In Tokyo, the government's inaction became a death sentence, and the people's faith in their leaders crumbled. On August 10, 1945, Emperor Hirohito convened the Imperial Conference, a gathering of Japan's highest leaders. The room crackled with tension as warhawks clashed with those pleading for peace. Prime Minister Suzuki, overwhelmed, turned to the emperor for a final decision. Hirohito, his voice breaking, spoke of the extinction of our nation. If the war continued, for the first time in 2,600 years, Japan faced defeat. His decision to accept the Potsdam Declaration was a surrender, a word unspoken but understood. The divine emperor, once untouchable, now bowed to reality. On the eve of Japan's surrender, a group of fanatical kamikaze officers, led by a fiery captain, launched a desperate coup. Storming the imperial palace, they hunted for the recording of Hirohito's surrender edict, determined to fight to the end. Gunfire echoed through Tokyo's streets as they clashed with loyalist forces. The coup collapsed in chaos. At noon on August 15, 1945, Hirohito's voice, frail yet resolute, broadcast across Japan. For the first time, the Divine Emperor spoke directly to his people, announcing surrender while avoiding the word defeat. The nation listened in stunned silence. Their world forever changed. On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japan's delegation signed the unconditional surrender. General Douglas MacArthur, his presence commanding, declared the Pacific War over. The rising sun had fallen, its empire in ruins. Japan's defeat was more than a military loss. It marked the collapse of colonialism worldwide. Nations like Vietnam seized the moment to claim independence, heralding a new era. But the cost was immense: millions dead, cities razed, and a nation scarred by the horrors of war. The fall of Imperial Japan was a tragedy and a triumph, a story of hubris, sacrifice, and redemption that would echo through history.